On a bitter February morning in 2019, Sheriff Marcus Coleman of Stone County, Arkansas, received a call that would haunt him for the rest of his career. A concerned postal worker reported that mail hadn't been collected from a remote property deep in the Ozark Mountains for over 3 months. The address belonged to the Whitmore family, a clan that had lived in complete isolation on a 400-acre plot for nearly 8 decades. What began as a routine welfare check would soon uncover one of the most disturbing cases of genetic isolation in American history. The Whitmore compound sat at the end of a barely passable dirt road, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor and 23 miles from the small town of Mountain View. For generations, locals had whispered about the strange family that never came to town, never attended church, and never sent their children to school. Some dismissed them as harmless hermits, while others shared darker suspicions passed down through generations of hushed conversations. When Sheriff Coleman and his deputies finally reached the property that February day, they discovered a secret that had been hidden in plain sight for 8 decades, a family tree that had grown into a twisted circle, with consequences that defied medical understanding. If you think you can handle the disturbing truth behind this case, let me know in the comments. And if you want to explore more cases that authorities tried to keep hidden, subscribe now, because what we uncovered will change how you see isolated communities forever. The Whitmore family's journey to isolation began in 1941 when Jeremiah Whitmore, a 34-year-old widower from Kentucky, purchased 400 acres of rugged Ozark mountain land for $200. Jeremiah had lost his wife and 2 children to tuberculosis and sought solitude in the Arkansas wilderness. The property, accessible only by a single winding trail, offered the complete separation from society he desperately craved. Jeremiah brought with him his 16-year-old sister-in-law, Martha, whom he had promised his dying wife he would protect. The remote location, surrounded by dense forests and rocky cliffs, seemed perfect for a man seeking to escape the world's pain. The nearest town, Mountain View, was a grueling day's journey by horse through treacherous mountain paths. Initially, Jeremiah made occasional trips to town for supplies, and locals remember him as a quiet but polite man who paid his bills and minded his own business. However, as the years passed, these trips became less frequent. By 1945, town records show the last documented visit by any Whitmore family member to Mountain View's general store. The family's self-sufficiency grew out of necessity and paranoia. Jeremiah constructed a series of cabins scattered across the property, dug wells, and established gardens and livestock pens. He taught himself carpentry, blacksmithing, and basic medicine from books ordered through mail catalogs. As the outside world modernized, the Whitmores remained frozen in time, developing their own insular community with its own rules and customs. By the 1950s, smoke from their chimneys was the only sign that anyone still lived on the mountain. The postal service continued delivering mail to a box at the road's entrance, but no one ever saw who collected it. The family had effectively vanished from civilized society while remaining in plain sight. Sheriff Coleman's initial approach to the Whitmore property on February 15, 2019, required a 4-wheel drive vehicle and 2 hours of careful navigation through overgrown trails. Accompanying him were Deputy Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran specializing in rural welfare cases, and Dr. Helen Rodriguez, a social worker from the Arkansas Department of Human Services who had volunteered to assist with what they assumed would be a routine elderly welfare check. The first structure they encountered was a deteriorating wooden gate bearing a hand-painted sign, "Whitmore Family, Private Property, No Trespassing." Beyond the gate, a network of dirt paths wound between a cluster of ramshackle buildings that appeared to have been constructed and modified over decades. Smoke rising from several chimneys indicated the property was still inhabited. Sheriff Coleman's initial calls received no response, but movement in the windows of the main cabin suggested someone was watching their approach. When a figure finally emerged, all three officials were struck by his appearance. The man, who identified himself as Thomas Whitmore, appeared to be in his 40s but moved with the uncertainty of someone much older. His speech was difficult to understand, and his physical features immediately raised concerns for Dr. Rodriguez, who had specialized in developmental disabilities for over 20 years. Thomas led them to meet other family members, and what they found defied their expectations. The property housed 17 individuals ranging in age from 5 to 68, all claiming to be Whitmores. However, their physical appearances told a story that their family tree couldn't adequately explain. Several family members displayed similar facial characteristics, unusual physical proportions, and varying degrees of intellectual disabilities. The living conditions were primitive but not necessarily neglectful. The family had electricity generated by a small hydroelectric system rigged to a nearby stream, and their homes, while rustic, were clean and functional. Gardens provided vegetables, and livestock pens contained chickens, goats, and pigs. What disturbed the investigators wasn't the family's self-sufficiency, but the patterns they were beginning to recognize in the family members' appearances and behaviors. Dr. Rodriguez discreetly photographed several family members and noted unusual physical characteristics in her initial report. Sheriff Coleman documented the property's layout and recorded his observations of family dynamics that seemed far more complex than a typical extended family structure. None of them could have predicted that their routine welfare check was about to expose 8 decades of secrets. The true nature of the Whitmore family's isolation became clear during a follow-up visit 3 days later, when a team of medical professionals accompanied law enforcement to conduct health assessments. Dr. Amanda Foster, a geneticist from the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, had reviewed Dr. Rodriguez's initial photographs and requested permission to examine the family members more thoroughly. What Dr. Foster discovered would later be described in her official report as one of the most extreme cases of consanguinity documented in modern American medical literature. Through careful observation and genetic analysis, she determined that the 17 family members represented only 4 distinct genetic lineages, with multiple generations of close relative reproduction, creating what she termed a genetic bottleneck of unprecedented severity. The family's patriarch, now 68-year-old Thomas Whitmore Sr., was simultaneously the grandfather, father, and uncle to various family members. DNA analysis would later reveal consanguinity coefficients ranging from 0.25 to 0.50, indicating relationships between siblings, parents, and children, and uncles and nieces had produced offspring across multiple generations. The original Jeremiah and Martha had begun this pattern in the 1940s, and it had continued uninterrupted for nearly 8 decades. Medical examinations revealed a catalogue of genetic conditions rarely seen in such concentration. 7 family members suffered from various forms of intellectual disability, ranging from mild learning difficulties to severe cognitive impairment. 3 children displayed classic signs of microcephaly, with abnormally small head circumferences indicating stunted brain development. 4 adults showed signs of polydactyly, possessing extra fingers or toes, while 6 family members had significant visual impairments, including albinism and congenital cataracts. Dr. James Mitchell, a pediatric neurologist brought in to assess the children, documented cases of epilepsy, autism spectrum disorders, and developmental delays that he attributed directly to the extreme genetic inbreeding. His report noted that the 5-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan Whitmore, displayed intelligence quotients of 45 and 52 respectively, placing them in the category of moderate intellectual disability. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of detailed family records maintained by the family's matriarch, 64-year-old Rebecca Whitmore. Her handwritten journals, kept in a locked wooden box, documented births, deaths, and relationships spanning 8 decades. The records revealed that 31 children had been born on the property since 1941, with 14 dying in infancy or early childhood due to various genetic complications. Dr. Foster's genetic analysis revealed that the family's gene pool had become so restricted that they essentially functioned as a single genetic unit. The coefficient of inbreeding for the youngest generation approached levels typically seen only in laboratory animal breeding programs. Her report concluded that the Whitmore family represents a human population that has undergone genetic isolation comparable to endangered species in captivity, with corresponding medical and developmental consequences. The evidence painted a clear picture. What had begun as a grieving man's attempt to protect his deceased wife's sister had evolved into 8 decades of systematic inbreeding that had created a genetically isolated population unlike anything documented in modern American history. As investigators pieced together the Whitmore family's history through Rebecca's journals and interviews with older family members, a disturbing pattern of control and manipulation emerged. The original isolation, which began as Jeremiah's grief-driven retreat from society, had evolved into a systematic effort to maintain what he viewed as family purity. Rebecca's journals revealed that Jeremiah had convinced Martha that the outside world was dangerous and corrupt, using the trauma of losing his first family to tuberculosis as evidence that contact with outsiders brought only death and suffering. By 1947, when Martha bore their first child, Jeremiah had established a family doctrine that prohibited contact with anyone outside their bloodline. The journals documented how Jeremiah had gradually expanded the family's isolation philosophy into a pseudo-religious belief system. He taught his children that their family was chosen and that maintaining their genetic line was a sacred duty. Children were educated only by family members, using materials that reinforced these beliefs and portrayed the outside world as threatening and immoral. Interviews with older family members revealed that several individuals had attempted to leave the property over the decades. Rebecca's journal entries from the 1960s describe how her brother Samuel had tried to walk to town at age 16, but was tracked down and brought back by other family members. His subsequent punishment involved isolation in a root cellar for several weeks until he remembered his family obligations. The investigation uncovered evidence that the family's isolation wasn't entirely voluntary for all members. Dr. Rodriguez documented signs of psychological trauma in several adults that suggested coercive control had been used to prevent departures. Family members described a complex system of surveillance and mutual reporting that made escape nearly impossible. Most disturbing was the revelation that family members had been specifically paired for reproduction based on Jeremiah's interpretation of genetic compatibility. Rebecca's journals contained detailed genealogical charts showing planned relationships designed to strengthen family traits. These arrangements had been presented to family members as marriages blessed by family tradition, but medical analysis revealed they were scientifically designed to intensify specific genetic characteristics. The property's layout supported this control system, with individual family units housed in separate cabins but connected by paths that made monitoring movement easy. A central building served as both meeting hall and school, where children learned family history, basic academics, and the ideology that justified their isolation. The investigation revealed that no family member born on the property had ever seen a doctor, attended public school, or held a government-issued identification document. Dr. Foster's comprehensive genetic analysis of the Whitmore family provided unprecedented scientific data on the effects of extreme human inbreeding over multiple generations. Her research, later published in the Journal of Medical Genetics, documented consanguinity coefficients that exceeded anything previously recorded in human populations outside of controlled research environments. The medical team identified 12 distinct genetic disorders within the family, many occurring at rates thousands of times higher than in the general population. Autosomal recessive conditions, which typically require both parents to carry the same rare genetic variant, appeared in nearly every family member due to the shared genetic material accumulated over 8 decades of close relative reproduction. Dr. Mitchell's neurological assessments revealed that intellectual disability affected 65% of the family, compared to approximately 1% in the general population. The average IQ among testable family members was 68, placing most in the mild to moderate intellectual disability range. 3 family members were diagnosed with severe intellectual disability and required constant care for basic daily functions. Physical abnormalities were equally striking. Polydactyly, affecting 35% of the family, occurs in roughly 0.1% of typical births. Microcephaly was present in 18% of family members, compared to 0.002% in the general population. Vision problems affected 71% of the family, with several cases of complete blindness caused by genetic conditions like Leber congenital amaurosis. Dr. Foster's research revealed that the family's genetic isolation had created what scientists term a founder effect on steroids. With such a limited gene pool, harmful recessive alleles had become fixed in the population, meaning every child born had a high probability of inheriting multiple genetic disorders. Blood work revealed additional complications, including hemophilia, sickle cell trait, and various metabolic disorders. The family's limited genetic diversity had eliminated their ability to fight certain diseases, making them vulnerable to conditions that rarely affect diverse populations. Perhaps most significant was Dr. Foster's discovery that the family's reproductive potential was declining rapidly. Fertility rates had dropped dramatically in recent generations, with longer intervals between successful pregnancies and higher rates of miscarriage and infant mortality. Her analysis suggested that without genetic diversity, the family line would likely end within 2 more generations due to accumulated genetic damage that made reproduction increasingly difficult. The legal proceedings that followed the Whitmore family's discovery presented unprecedented challenges for Arkansas's criminal justice system. Prosecutors faced the complex task of determining criminal responsibility in a case where victims and perpetrators often belonged to the same family, and where cultural isolation had created a closed system with its own moral framework. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh filed charges against 3 adult family members, Thomas Whitmore Sr., his brother Marcus Whitmore, and Rebecca Whitmore. The charges included child endangerment, statutory rape, and incest spanning multiple decades. However, prosecuting these cases proved extraordinarily difficult due to the unique circumstances of the family's isolation. Defense attorneys argued that the family members had been raised in a closed system where their actions were normalized and even encouraged by family tradition. Dr. Robert Hayes, a forensic psychologist, testified that many of the accused individuals were themselves victims of generational abuse and manipulation, who lacked the cognitive capacity to understand the criminality of their actions. Judge Patricia Morrison, who presided over the proceedings, noted in her ruling that the case represented a collision between legal standards designed for mainstream society and a population that has existed outside social norms for 8 decades. The complexity of determining competency to stand trial for individuals with various degrees of intellectual disability further complicated proceedings. Ultimately, Thomas Whitmore Sr. was sentenced to 15 years in prison for multiple counts of child endangerment and incest. Marcus Whitmore received 10 years, while Rebecca Whitmore was sentenced to 5 years with the possibility of parole due to her cooperation with authorities and her own history as a victim within the family structure. The case prompted Arkansas to review its rural monitoring systems and led to legislation requiring periodic welfare checks for isolated families who homeschool their children. Legal experts noted that the Whitmore case highlighted gaps in child protection systems that allow vulnerable populations to exist without oversight for extended periods. The rehabilitation of the Whitmore family members presented challenges that social services had never encountered. 14 family members, ranging from children to adults with various degrees of intellectual disability, required integration into a modern society they had never experienced. The Arkansas Department of Human Services developed specialized programs to address their unique needs. The 5 children under 18 were placed in foster care with families trained in special needs adoption. Emma and Ethan, the 5-year-old twins with moderate intellectual disabilities, were placed together with experienced foster parents who specialized in caring for children with developmental delays. Social worker Maria Santos, who coordinated their placement, reported that the children initially showed extreme fear of strangers and had difficulty understanding basic concepts like electricity, telephones, and indoor plumbing. Adult family members faced different challenges. Those with mild intellectual disabilities entered supervised group homes where they learned basic life skills like using currency, navigating public transportation, and interacting with strangers. The process was complicated by their complete lack of official documentation. None had birth certificates, social security numbers, or any form of legal identification. Dr. Patricia Williams, who directed the rehabilitation program, noted that several family members showed remarkable resilience and adaptability. 28-year-old Daniel Whitmore, despite mild intellectual disability, learned to read at a functional level and eventually found employment at a local farm where his experience with livestock proved valuable. However, integration wasn't universally successful. 3 older family members, including 2 with severe intellectual disabilities, required permanent institutional care. The trauma of separation from their familiar environment, combined with their cognitive limitations, made adaptation to modern life impossible. The youngest children showed the most promise for full integration. With intensive educational support and therapy, several demonstrated significant improvement in cognitive and social functioning. Special education specialist Dr. Carol Anderson reported that with proper support, some of the children might eventually achieve independence. Follow-up studies conducted 5 years after the rescue showed mixed outcomes. While younger family members generally adapted well, older individuals continued to struggle with the complexity of modern society. The case became a model for how social services approach the rehabilitation of individuals from extremely isolated communities, influencing protocols for similar situations nationwide. The Whitmore case forced American society to confront uncomfortable questions about rural isolation, government oversight, and the limits of family autonomy. Child protection advocates used the case to argue for increased monitoring of homeschooling families and isolated communities, while civil liberties groups warned against excessive government intrusion into private family life. Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the National Child Welfare Institute, testified before Congress that the Whitmore case represented a failure of multiple systems designed to protect vulnerable populations. She noted that the family's complete absence from official records, no birth certificates, school enrollment, medical records, or tax filings, should have triggered intervention decades earlier. The case prompted Arkansas to implement the Rural Family Monitoring Act, requiring periodic contact between isolated homeschooling families and local authorities. Similar legislation was introduced in 12 other states with large rural populations. Critics argued that these measures unfairly targeted rural families and violated constitutional protections of family privacy. Medical researchers gained unprecedented insights into human genetics from the Whitmore family's DNA samples. Dr. Foster's research contributed to understanding of genetic bottlenecks and their effects on human populations, with implications for conservation biology and evolutionary science. The data helped scientists better understand genetic risks in small, isolated populations worldwide. The case also highlighted socioeconomic factors that enable such isolation. Poverty, lack of education, and geographic barriers combine to create conditions where a family could exist outside societal norms for 8 decades. Social researchers noted that similar conditions exist in other rural areas, suggesting the Whitmore case might not be unique. Educational institutions developed new curricula addressing genetic literacy and the importance of genetic diversity in human populations. The case became a teaching tool for medical students, social workers, and law enforcement officers dealing with isolated populations. Most significantly, the Whitmore case challenged assumptions about individual freedom versus collective responsibility, forcing society to consider when intervention in private family matters becomes a moral imperative to protect vulnerable individuals who cannot protect themselves. The Whitmore family's story stands as a testament to both the devastating consequences of isolation and the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. While their legacy includes 8 decades of genetic tragedy, it also demonstrates the power of intervention and rehabilitation to transform lives. Dr. Foster's final words in her research summary perhaps best capture the case's significance. The Whitmores remind us that genetic diversity isn't just a scientific concept, it's fundamental to human flourishing. If you watched until here, it means you truly care about uncovering these hidden truths. Comment, "I watched until here," so I can recognize the real followers who aren't afraid of difficult realities. Don't forget to like this video if you believe these stories need to be told, and share it with people who value investigative content. Subscribe now for more cases that authorities hoped would stay buried forever.